Hey, everybody. Welcome aboard. Lieutenant Joe here. Today, I have a special guest, Dr. Robert Rail. Now, if you remember, Dr. Rail was on the program several months ago, and we had talked about a very interesting topic, the black swan incident, something you don't expect, and then it happens to you. It was really a popular episode. You go back and listen to it. But we have him on today, and I'll let him tell you about his background because he's really a very interesting man. He's an author. He was a professor at Northwestern University. He's been in the military, law enforcement, you name it. A great background. But we're going to talk today a little bit about understanding chokeholds. Now, you say to yourself, well, it seems pretty simple, right? You choke somebody out. And in law enforcement, we used it for years. It was a way to control a very unruly person because it wasn't meant to kill anybody. Unfortunately, over the years, it was done incorrectly, and people did end up getting killed. So, Dr. Rail, just tell us a little bit who you are and what you're all about.
Joe, thanks for having me on the show. Great show. Really enjoy watching and listening to you. As far as me, I'm really an old dog in this field. I'm a retired police officer from the Chicago area, and after I retired, I went out and I ended up in Bosnia and Kosovo, and then I ended up in Iraq. But the Iraq curriculum that I taught was a curriculum that is not for the United States. It was a war zone curriculum. It was teaching these our absolutely wonderful men and women in uniform over there how to take somebody out, which is an actual deadly choke. It's totally different than what I taught for Northwestern University. Northwestern University program that I taught for the instructors worldwide was a program to restrain. Now, in restraint, you're immobilizing the body. What you're using if you choose to use the upper body for a restraint is you're lacing your arms in, and there's several different methodologies and techniques for lacing your arms into the upper body, the shoulders, and the head area of a person to restrain them. This is a very simple thing, but it's more of a muscle move. Now, years and years ago, many years ago in law enforcement, there were a lot of a lot of techniques that were utilized that did cause a cessation of air and blood, and this induced unconsciousness. It's a simple way to explain this is if you walk into a restaurant and you're on a break and you're in uniform and people see you and they say, somebody's choking, somebody's choking. Well, you run over to the area and sure enough, somebody's walking around and they're grabbing their throat. No air is moving. They are choking. And soon they're going to collapse. Very soon they're going to collapse. The thing is, there's no breathing going on. In severe cases, there's no blood flow in case there's an injury in an auto accident or expansion of traumatized tissue in the neck area for swelling and cuts it down. But what we look for and what we understand is actually the word choke. The word choke is nothing is passing, it's obstructed. And it can be obstructed in several ways. Now, what we've received very heavily in the media has been really disgusting and outrageous. They haven't taken the time to be open about it, to be truthful about it. It's become a political issue that's not a technical issue. It's not a tactical issue. It's purely political. When a choke is put on a person, if we're discussing a choke, like what I did overseas, that would be something that would cut the airflow. If you cut the airflow, if you put your your arm across their neck in one of several different manners. It stops, like I'm stopping here. It stops, it stops the air. If you stop the air, totally stop it, you're talking about 30, 45 seconds, the person's going to be out. Uh, More or less, depending on how much they're resisting and how much air, oxygen they're burning. Now, this has to be taken into consideration always. But when you're talking about a, a stronger choke where there's more pressure, then you're talking getting into the vascular tissue. You're stopping blood flow. If you stop blood flow, it's going to be somewhere around 5 seconds, maybe a hair more, maybe a little bit less. But the best way to describe that is that's the arterial network. And if you can remember, if you were ever on a gurney and you're in the hospital and they're putting you out and they're saying, okay, count backwards from 10, you'll never make it backwards from 10. They're what they're doing is they're inducing something into your bloodstream. And what a choke is it's blocking off that bloodstream. So you're talking a very short amount of time. Now, what I taught when I was in Iraq was nicknamed by the local just tremendous people in uniform. They're they nicknamed it a guillotine because you slam it on, you put the choke on, but there's a very sharp compression, a very fast compression, and this literally knocks a person out. Because if you can imagine this, your garden hose is running. It's laying on the pavement. The water is running out the end. If you stamp on that hose, you'll see a gush of water come out. Well, if that's a choke, a slam choke, or a guillotine choke to the neck, what it does is it provides that gush of blood, and that gush of blood goes to the brain. And since it's too much pressure, it knocks the brain out. It immobilizes it very quickly, right there and then. And so that choke, a guillotine choke, if you want to call it that, or a slam choke or a rapid compression choke, that's something that puts a person out in one excuse me, 1 second, very, very quickly.
Yeah.
If it's maintained, it can be fatal. But that was in a war zone. That was when I was over there. Here, when I'm teaching with a state, federal, or local agency, it's it's a matter of restraint. If a person is yelling, if a person is screaming and swearing and going crazy, what they are doing is they're in a situation where there's another term that comes in here, and that's called excited delirium.
Mm. Yep.
Joe, I'm sure you know you're a top trainer. You're right there. You're with me and everything. Uh, Excited delirium is they're just drugged out of control or emotionally out of control from the natural enzymes that are in the human body, and it's just absolutely taken over. But the thing we really need to be cognizant of, and the thing we really need to think about is it's a matter of flow. It's a matter of the airflow, the blood flow. If they are making any type of sounds, if they are yelling, it's not a choke. It never was a choke. It's a restraint.
I think that's an important distinction for people to understand because many times we hear that, well, you were choking him out. Remember that guy in New York? He was selling single cigarettes, and it's a tragedy when anyone dies involved with the police. But this guy was screaming, "I can't breathe! I can't breathe! I can't breathe!" He wasn't being choked. If he could say that, then he wasn't being choked.
Absolutely. Good point. They verbalize, you're not choking them. If they're swearing at you, well, that's a good sign. They're breathing. There's no
Right.
problem.
And I
It's a
think a lot of that is when they're resisting and now they're fighting. They can feel like they're out of breath. It's exhausting when you're fighting with somebody. And I can't breathe. Well, maybe they have an underlying breathing condition, and now it's getting worse because they're exerting themselves and they're having that difficulty. But to say that, they can't breathe when they're screaming at you is not correct. When you shut off the sound because you shut off the wind, then yeah, then they're choking.
If they're actually being choked, exactly, Joe, exactly. They aren't going to make a sound. There's going to be no sound coming from them. You may hear grunting, but that's all you're going to hear. Uh, Working with the different countries when I was in Iraq, we had a couple of different countries there. Uh, they they were very, very active in using different types of methodologies for arrest and control. But basically, I worked with the U.S. forces, and the U.S. forces are taught a couple of different ways. The Rangers were taught one way. Marines were taught a very similar way, but a little bit different. But the main thing is the cutting off of the air and blood. If it's a hard compression, it's just more force applied. There's basically one choke taught to our military, and it's a matter of how hard it's applied, how firmly it's locked up under the chin and pulled back and tightened and torqued. That's what constitutes a choke in the cutting off of the air, cutting off of the blood, cutting off the circulation. Uh, what we're using now in the United States for our police is it's a restraint, it's a hold, anything around that area. So if we hear somebody or we see somebody on a video and they're swearing and they're screaming and they're yelling, it's not a choke, it's a restraint, purely.
Right. And that's, I think we saw that now with Daniel Perry, the Marine, who was on the train in New York. And he restrained an individual who was threatening everybody. And by all accounts, the people that were on the train said they were of fear for their life. And this guy jumped up and he did the right thing. He tried to protect everybody and he put him into what they're all calling a chokehold. Um, but you can see, okay, he's a military guy, and there's one kind of a what you're explaining is that there's one kind of a hold, and if I apply it in a different way, if I tighten it up, that's military in the battlefield. You take somebody out. You extinguish their life because they're fighting with you. They're the enemy. If you don't do it that hard, you can certainly get them to pass out and then they recover. I remember I was taught that in the police academy. Here's how you do this. If somebody's out of control, here's the kind of hold you can do. The sleeper hold in wrestling. Anybody who watches wrestling, they did the sleeper hold, and that would knock a guy out, and then they wake up when the blood is restored and the breathing is restored. So I guess when we saw what this Marine did is that he was trying to protect this guy, and he didn't stop. He wanted to keep fighting this guy, and that's why he maintained the hold. And unfortunately, it's always a tragedy when someone expires. But now they're saying he had drugs in his system. And when the officers arrived, the police officers arrived, there I thought I'm here reporting that the guy was talking. He was still saying something. So therefore, how could he be choked if he's talking? Just like the guy selling the cigarette screaming, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. Well, if you can scream, I can't breathe, you're still alive. I mean, you're still breathing, right? You're not choking to death.
It's it's so unfortunate. We're this brings up another a side issue to the police. We restrain here in the United States. War zone are incredibly outstanding men and women in uniform who are in the war zones and in the military. Well, they choke out of necessity because they don't want to lose their life.
Right.
So it's a situation, but qualified immunity is being attacked on, and this is one of the major issues where these very corrupt situations in and unfortunately the court systems have become very, very corrupt also. uh, so many people are attacking the qualified immunity. I would really like to see them challenge the qualified immunity for the attorneys and the judges and challenge their qualified immunity. They're in the same situation
Right.
for this facade that they're putting over what is just simply tactical training. Uh, we have a lot of great academies in the United States. We've got a lot of great police departments, and they're involved at a tactical level of restraining people. And
Right.
they're not choking out people, they're restraining people.
Right.
And so much is coming up from a lot of supposed coroners that are coming up with information that is just incorrect, or they don't have all the information. They're making snap judgments over something in their field should be totally science related,
Right.
totally what's in the bloodstream, totally what is causing the excited delirium.
And
What,
I
you know,
think a lot of what we see now has politicized. Anything with the police is politicized. Now, let me say for because there's a lot of people that they sit in their basement and they take notes. Anytime somebody talks about law enforcement, and they're sitting in their underwear and then they're going to write a nasty letter to somebody. Nobody is saying anyone should die in an interaction with law enforcement, but the reality is we have changed our societal view of what law enforcement's job is and how we are to respond to them. The bottom line is that the cops are not a bunch of rogue people that just go out and who are we going to kill today? If an officer gives you an order, whether you like it or not, you should comply to the order. If they tell you you are under arrest, you should submit to the arrest. And in 99% of these cases where someone dies in an arrest situation with law enforcement, that was brought on by their actions, right? Now, there are times when there's a bad cop, no doubt about it. But most of them, if I said to you, Dr. Rail, you have a warrant, you're under arrest, and you comply, put your hands behind your back, you're going to get handcuffed and taken away. You start fist fighting, screaming, yanking it, trying to grab the officer's gun, kicking, maybe you have a weapon of your own. It's not going to work out well for you. And that's what we've kind of lost sight of this whole new, change the police mission. Let's stop making resisting arrest a felony. Now it's a choice now. So we've enabled people to say, if you don't agree with the arrest, you don't want to be arrested, you think the officer's arresting you for a bogus reason, you don't have to comply. And that none of that is true, and that's what causes the problem. Your time to argue is in court. You get arrested, comply, go to court, tell the judge, I didn't like what the cop did. I didn't like how the officer, I don't think the warrant was valid. I didn't steal all that stuff I had in my cart, whatever it is. We've kind of gotten away from that as a society that understand if we want to have a non-chaotic society, a society that's safe for everyone to walk the streets, for little children to sit on their front porches and not get shot by stray bullets, then we have to value what law enforcement does, provide excellent training, no doubt about it. We have to screen those who want to become police officers, and so that we provide an excellent service. But the reality is, we've come far afield from how we view law enforcement as a society, and I'm okay with changing the mission if we decide we don't want cops to stop people in cars anymore. Okay, you want unsafe cars to ride up and down the road, poor drivers? There's a consequence for that. Whatever it is, whatever it is, I've talked about it in different programs. What do we want our cops to do? How do we want them to behave, interact? We can change those rules, but the reality is when you back the cops off, you see what happens in all of these cities where they're defunding the police, get rid of the cops, they hate the cops, police back off, and crime goes out of control. And then more people are victimized, more people are hurt, more people are injured. So I think there's somewhere down the middle we can figure out how do we train better, have better people on the job, and then society needs to understand we all have to follow the rules, the laws, so that we have this nice society. And to go back to Daniel Penny, I'm sorry, this young man is in there trying to protect. I've been on these subways where you have these crazy people. My daughter's a young woman. She worked in the city for a while. She was accosted several times by people who seemed to have real serious mental conditions. They were threatening, and there was nobody there to help. She's just lucky nobody did anything bad. So it's a tough situation. I feel bad for anyone's family when they lose somebody in an interaction like that. But it seems clear that most of this is brought on by the people with a mental condition, a problem, intoxication. just a criminal attitude. People just comply, follow the laws. You'll have much less of that. So, I guess my last question for you, I want to keep you all day, but I love having you on here. Um, when you say that there's training, is there safe restraint holds that officers could be taught?
Absolutely. There's different methodologies for controlling a person. One would be you know, different parts of the body. There are a couple of techniques where you can isolate the legs, and then the person just flops around like a fish. But they're going nowhere. They're going nowhere. But then they have their arms. The thing with the close space that Penny was dealing with was there were people in that area, and he wanted to get that control on the upper body. Now he was trained to control the upper body as a Marine, but in a more lethal methodology. But there are a variety of come-alongs. There's a variety of holes. What I would suggest to the officers who's watching right now is you don't need to learn a whole lot of different techniques, but you do need to get one or two techniques down really good and practice them. Practice them. Constant repetition. Repetition is the learner to everything. We learn to eat with a knife and fork out of repetition. You watch a baby eat, it's the same thing. You watch an adult eat. No, it becomes a a instinctive function. We want to get self-defense and control of a person as a police officer to be a instinctive function where you walk up to a person, uh, a wedding, a wake or something. You walk up, you don't want it to the point where you walk up to your uncle and put a come along on him, but you do want it to be an instinctive function.
Yes,
And
so that you
and
can restrain somebody when you have to, and you get control over them, so that there's no more violence. That's the key to any restraint. Is it stops the violence, right? Take someone into custody, prevent them from hurting themselves, you or anybody else around.
it's so easy to do. It's so easy to do. But the main thing is find something that works. Find something that works for your height, your weight, your level of strength. There's so many different controls, and network. Check with other officers. What would they use? And if they can't come up with an answer, that's really unfortunate because now maybe you bumped into somebody who should be training, and they should be training, and they should be learning a
Yeah.
restraint, a control. This in Russia. I remember when I was in Kosovo, we had I worked with the Russians, and when they put on a control, it's a choke and they lock it up and they go down. They drop down. They take them to the ground immediately because that burns a couple of seconds. And in those couple of seconds, by the time they hit the pavement, they're out cold. It's a no nonsense. It's purely a choke. There's a lot of countries in the world, it's a choke. I can
Yeah.
think of Senegal and Ghana and Africa, very efficient officers. They don't play games. They lock a person up, take them down, control.
Right.
Uh,
And I guess the mission of those agencies are different than here in America. That's not our first go-to to choke somebody out. It's to control them. And if they would just comply, none of this would happen. But people
here,
don't comply. They're being told they don't have to comply. They're being encouraged not to comply, and that's going to create this danger.
I've been all over the world, and we are the most humane, cognizant of the arrestee police in the world. There is no police department in the world who is literally, I want to use the word gentle, but that's what we are. We are very soft on people in this country. This this criminal, this mutt with two T's, this this character, he was arrested over 40 times Now, this is purely the fault of the court. It's the fault of judges popping them loose on bond and bail and letting them walk out to hurt someone else. We need to take the victim and put the victim at the very top of the list for what we're concerned about. Too many
I
people are
agree.
being hurt, and a lot of them they're not around anymore. Now, this character that Penny dealt with, he severely hurt a woman very recently, and now he's back. He was back again in the subway threatening people.
Right.
And he's, threatening people, and it was just absolutely ridiculous that he be free. Our court systems are a circus. They're literally a one-ring circus where they dominate at the behest of the media so they can have sensationalism. You get DAs, and the one thing with a DA wants to be these corrupt DAs, and they are corrupt, is they want to be relevant. They want to be relevant to the people who vote them into office or appoint them to these positions. And to get to be relevant, they want to stand out with notoriety. So they want to please the press. They want to please the media. And the media is no longer news, they're entertainment. And they have no consideration over what we as police are dealing with because we're dealing at a tactical level. We're dealing with efficiency and a tactical function, and they want it to be sensationalized like they're watching a TV program.
Yep. And I think the proof is in the pudding, as they say. This whole wave of anti-police for the last couple of years, it's all philosophy. It's thought in a box in these ivory towers that has nothing to do with how life is really on the street. You know, you can go to any of these neighborhoods where there's tons and tons of violence, and there's thousands and thousands of good people living there, and they're stuck in this violence. And the politicians, they kowtow to the criminal element instead of worrying about the victim, like you're saying, and going in and cleaning up the neighborhood. You know, you look at Chicago, where there's how many murders every single weekend. The people who live in those neighborhoods are suffering. They're American citizens. You know, that's something you go in there. Well, of course, then you have to go in and make arrests, and people don't want to get arrested, and they're going to fight with the cops, and there's going to be injuries, and people are, well, that's because you let that go on. So I think, you know, when we look at that, it's crystal clear what happens when you don't think of the victim first and then hold people to account for their behavior. They can't hurt other people. They can't victimize people. And we've kind of gotten away from that. Hopefully, as we go forward, the pendulum swings. You and I both know I've been in this business a long, long time. We see law enforcement go from heroes to zeros and then back again. We see society swings. You know, we want reform in the justice system. And I think there's a lot of room for some reform. If we want to change the mission, do whatever. But you can't live a safe life if you have criminals calling the shot. So, Dr. Rell, I know you've written a lot of things. Where can we find your publications?
Well, right now, you could just go on with Varro Press, VARRO Press.com, or you can just go into the internet and just put in Dr. Robert Rail, and all my books are there, all my materials are there. But one group of people that I'm working with right now that's just unbelievably fantastic is, please, to everybody listening, check out Combat Stress Magazine. Combat Stress Magazine is for military, it is for police, it is for all of us, so that we don't get caught up in the in reviewing things in our mind which are hurting us so much emotionally and mentally. We need to have that relief factor. When you read Combat Stress Magazine, you're reading articles, well, by me and by so many others who have been through so much. And to share these things, to learn these things are critically important so that we have a better life when we come back from a war zone overseas, which can be horrendous and very hard to adjust. I know in my own small way. But it's also devastating because police on the street every day, we're dealing with some departments that are adversarial to the street cop. We're dealing with a court system that literally hates your guts the minute you walk into that room wearing a uniform. We're dealing with judges which are just vehement, looking for a chance to hurt police. We're dealing with DAs that all they want to do is build a career on destroying police and good arrests and good officers. This is something that Combat Stress Magazine, they focus on things, but they focus on us. You wear a uniform, you're out there, and you're looking to help victims. Combat Stress is for you. They're good people.
That's excellent.
You
I
know,
think I'll put that in the
they're
I'll
and
put
I
that in the info
appreciate
on the
you,
show.
Joe.
Yeah,
What you're doing, Joe, is critical. We have to know that there's a voice like yours out there for us.
I appreciate that.
Whether we're retired off the job and we just want to sit back and talk about old arrests and have a beer or a cup of coffee, that's one thing. But what you bring is critical. And the book, the interview, that I really like that a lot. It had a lot to say, even for senior people. There's a lot in there
I
because there's
appreciate
so much that we forget and we don't talk about anymore. And we need to talk about skills and situations and how they develop. And
right.
the
And that's
interview is
why I still teach, because I love being connected with the men and women of law enforcement. I like to pass on my skill sets so that they can have a better career and so they can protect society. That's really what they're all about. That's their mission. That's what we're all about. But I'll put the information about Combat Stress Magazine in the info for the program so everybody can take a look at it. Dr. Rail, I appreciate you being on here. We'll get you back. I know you have so much to talk about. It's always
And
amazing
we
anytime I have you
appreciate
on.
you. We appreciate you too, Joe. I get calls and I get calls from all over because I take this show and I send it out. I send it out to Spain and Germany and France and England and they come back at me and they go, "Hey, that was a great clip you sent me. It was very interesting." Um,
Well, I do
so
appreciate that here, sending out. You have a huge audience and it's nice to hear from everybody. So we will have Dr. Rail back again. I want to thank him for being here. And everybody remember, uh, take a look at that magazine, Combat Stress Magazine. Look for his books, VARRO Press. Go out there or just Google the name, Dr. Robert Rail. Amazing items, articles, brilliant man. And we're thrilled to have him here. So remember, be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. We'll see you down the road.